a couple years ago, my daughter, right now, she's 5 years old, but a couple years ago, she started to realize the benefits, the immediate benefits at least, of like twisting the truth, of bending the truth, sometimes just flat out lying. And I would tell her, hey, we don't want to do that. We want to be honest people. We want to have integrity, stuff like that. Not sinking in. So one day, I sat her down, and I told her a story. I told her the story of the boy who cried wolf. And there was a complete 180. Now she's terrified of wolves. Just kidding. No. But it was like immediately it all sank in. In fact, when I got to the third time that the boy cries wolf, it was like she already knew what was going to happen. The lesson had already sunk in. And that's because stories have power, right? They have power to shape us. They have power to change the way that we think. And that's why Jesus used stories when he was explaining things about God, right? Stories have the ability to take something that's abstract, like a lie, or like integrity, or a principle like honesty, and make it super concrete, super easy to understand, and it also makes it really easy to remember. So today we're looking at a story that Jesus told that it's probably one of his most famous stories. It might be the most famous story. And I think the reason why is because it corrects one of the most widespread misconceptions about God. And the cool thing about it is that no matter where you are on the faith spectrum, this principle that Jesus, this misconception that Jesus exposes can speak to you. Whether you're like right in the start of your Christian faith, maybe not even sure, maybe still kind of like testing the waters, like I don't know about this, or maybe you've been in church forever and you know all the right things to say, you read your Bible every day, you pray all the time, right? And it's like no matter where you are, this story has something really powerful to say. So we'll jump right into it. We are in the Gospel of Luke, which is the good news about Jesus written down by a guy named Luke, right? So he kind of, he records this scene, and here's what it looks like. Jesus he's teaching to a gigantic crowd. It's hundreds, maybe even thousands of people that have come to listen to him. And the cool thing about it is everybody was attracted to him. There were people that were super, 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 like we would consider them like far off, like outcasts, rejects. They just called them sinners and tax collectors. These were the rebels in society. They were people that cheated people, people that were often considered dangerous. They're the people you don't want your kids talking to, the people that, you walk on the other side of the street if you see them coming, right? They're the people that no one likes. In that like culture, you wouldn't even look them in the eyes. You'd look the other way if you saw them. Sinners, tax collectors, nobody liked them. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have the respected people. In the eyes of the people, these were the esteemed religious teachers. They were called like Pharisees or teachers of the law. These were the people that were considered the experts in all things about God. They were the people that they did all the right things. They said all the right things. They had their Bible verses memorized. They said their prayers when they were supposed to. They gave their money. They did all the right things. And so you have people all across the spectrum, and they're all here to listen to what Jesus has to say. And he's talking about things that are lost, things that are lost. He starts out with the story of a lost sheep. He says, imagine you have 100 sheep, which, for us, probably nobody listening to this has 100 sheep. But back then, you either did have sheep or you knew someone that had sheep. So this was totally common. So he says, imagine you have 100 sheep and one of them goes missing. What do you do? And this is a no-brainer for everyone. Everyone's like, well, I leave the 99 sheep and I go find the one because you want to find what you've lost, right? And what he's explaining is God's attitude, God's feelings about people that we would consider lost. And we'll get to that in just a second. So he goes on, he tells another story about a lost coin. And he's like, so imagine this lady's got these coins and she loses one. And this was a bigger deal to her than it is to us. But he says she would have swept out the whole house, cleaned it out until she found that coin. And then when she found it, she would have celebrated. It was a big, big deal. And that's kind of hard to relate to, but it's a big deal. Just this past weekend, my brother got married and I was his best man, which meant I had to hold the rings. Specifically, I had to hold his fiance's wedding ring, the one with the diamonds in it. And I took it, and I didn't want to lose it, so I put it on my pinky finger. And then we went and we, lined up and did everything we needed. And when it was time in the ceremony for me to hand over the ring, it wasn't on my pinky. It was gone. I'm just kidding. But you know that feeling that you felt right there? It was fine. I kept it on my finger, and I didn't let it out of my sight because I wasn't going to be the guy that loses the wedding ring. But that feeling where you're like, oh no, that's the feeling everybody in this crowd has. And Jesus is using that feeling to explain how God feels when people are distant from him, when things aren't right with him. Little side note, especially if you have a church background. A lot of times we like to use the word lost to put people in a category or to give them a title or use it as a way of distinguishing people. And we don't see Jesus do that throughout the New Testament. He doesn't refer to people who don't believe what he's trying to teach as people who are lost. He uses that word lost metaphorically to communicate how God feels, to communicate God's passion for people with the same sense of desire and urgency, not to just simply put people in a category. That's kind of a separate topic, but I think it's an important thing to address. So he's told these two stories. And now if you're sitting there, you probably is talking about lost things, and you can tell he's talking about lost people, or at least getting to lost people. So probably in the back of your mind, if you're sitting there thinking, you've got some kind of concept of who is lost. Maybe you're asking, but probably you have some kind of idea. And so Jesus goes into a story that's going to communicate what it looks like the widespread misconception about God. He's going to paint a picture of what it looks like to be what we would call lost. And it might not be, or at least it wasn't what the people who were listening were expecting. So here's what he says. There was a man who had 2 sons, which is a pretty common thing. He said, the younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. Now you're sitting there and you're like, okay, that's not really a conversation that typically happens today. But back then, being a son in your birth order was a really big thing. Inheritance was a really big thing. What your father passed down to you, that was a big thing. But he did it when he died. And so for the son to ask for his inheritance was a really, really big deal. It would have been a ton of work. It would have required that the father would have to liquidate a lot of his assets. Back then, if there were 2 sons, the older son would get 2/3 of the estate, and the younger son would get 1/3 of the estate. And so because he's younger, he's basically asking his father to liquidate 1/3 of what he has and give it to his son. But in doing that, he is showing extreme disrespect and really just a lack of love and concern for his father. It would basically be like him saying, I wish you were dead. Or I don't care whether you're dead or alive. I just want your stuff. And so if you're listening there in that crowd, like back then, they, according to their law, what was like the norm in their culture, if they wanted to, you could actually kill a disobedient child. And so here we have somebody who's being just utterly disrespectful. What everyone in the crowd is expecting is for him to not only not give him what he asked for, but to totally disown him and kick him out of the family, because he's saying, I don't care about you. I don't want to be part of this family. I just want your stuff. So here's what happens. It says he said, give me my share of the estate. So the father divided his property between them. He gave him what he wanted. Shocking. No one expected that. Well, not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had. He set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. So if you're sitting there and you're one of those like religious people in the crowd, you're like, yep, here's our sinner. Here's the person who's lost, totally disrespectful, takes the stuff and just blows it all. He gets what he deserves. After he spent everything he had, there was a severe famine in that whole country, which wouldn't have been totally uncommon. If it stops raining, people can't grow their crops, they don't have food to eat, they don't have food to sell. So there's a famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went, and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country. The picture here is of someone who's made a horrible mistake. He's living a life of rebellion, and it comes back to bite him. Again, this is kind of what you'd expect, but Jesus here is also teaching something pretty profound to the people in the crowd that would probably consider themselves rebels. That's what we talked about in our first series. The first series we did started on week 2 called Detox. We talked about like how when we do things that God doesn't want us to do, it's not like, the problem is not that he's just like up there getting angry, mad that we're not listening to him. The idea is that these things, they're not wrong as much as they're toxic. Like the way Jesus' brother describes it, he says that this stuff leads to death. Like it ends up hurting you. And here Jesus is explaining that exact principle in the form of a story. He's like, look, this guy goes, he does everything he's not supposed to do, and look where it led him. He's out of everything. He's in a foreign country working for someone he doesn't know. And his job, it says the man sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Again, this is just a picture of complete disgust. The people in that culture, they hated pigs. They didn't touch pigs. They didn't want to feed pigs. They definitely didn't eat pigs. And the idea of wanting to eat what they were eating is just a picture of disappointment, of waste, of failure, of pain. And so Jesus is painting a picture here, like I said, of someone who's chosen a toxic lifestyle. He's gone out to discover himself, and it's led to nothing. And really, this is not a totally uncommon thing in our culture. Sometimes it takes us a while to realize how dangerous things are. Sometimes it's not as drastic. The pain isn't as immediate and as obvious. But at the end of the day, and we've talked about this before, at the end of the day, it ends in a place that's painful. It ends in disappointment. You've probably heard of the guy, the actor and comedian, his name's Jim Carrey. He said, I wish everybody could get rich and famous and find everything they ever wanted so that they would realize that it won't make them happy. He's talking about what C.S. Lewis calls the human heart's longing for home. Like a deep desire, a deep sense of satisfaction. And maybe you today are not like living a crazy life. Maybe you haven't told your parents that you wish that they're dead. Or maybe you haven't stolen things from them. Maybe you wouldn't consider yourself a rebel. But at the end of the day, when you put your head down on the pillow, if you're honest, there is a sense of dissatisfaction. There is a sense that you're longing for something more, a longing for home. And that's what Jesus is getting at here. There's someone who's distant. There's a longing for home. And so after everything he's done, he comes to his senses. He says, well, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. He comes up with a plan. He says, I'll set out and I'll go back to my father and I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and he went to his father. He's saying, look, I get what I did was wrong. I know like there's no way I'm ever coming back into the family, but maybe you could put me to work. I know I haven't worked like I'm supposed to, but maybe I could do enough to at least like get by, to be back under your roof. His resume in the past, it stinks if he failed and he knows it. But he's saying, give me a chance to start over. Let me rebuild like my resume, what I'm worth to you. And so he heads off for home. Jesus continues the story, and here's where things like get crazy. He says, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. There's a bunch of things going on here. The idea is that he's looking for him. Like he's like every day, like looking off into the distance. I don't know what the land was like. I don't know how far he could see, but the idea is that he's like hopefully like just wondering, is he gonna come back? Is he gonna come back? Is he gonna come back? And he finally sees him, and he's just filled with undignified compassion. For an older man at that time to run would have been totally shameful. Young men did. Maybe like middle-aged guys would run, but older men would have had to lift up their garments and show their legs, which men didn't do back then. It was a huge deal, but he doesn't care. He is overwhelmed with this undignified compassion. We've sung this song before called How He Loves. And in the song, there's this line, and a lot of times people redo the song, they change the line. But the line is that heaven meets earth like a wet, sloppy kiss. And people change it because it's like kind of ruins the mood a little bit. But that's the idea. It's this undignified, like uncontainable love that God has. Almost as if to say, I don't care how it looks, because he is so excited that what was lost is now found. And so he runs to his son, and the story gets better. It says, the son says to him, and I don't know if he had this on like a 3x5 index card he pulled out of his pocket, but he's got his like little pre-prepared script. He says, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. He memorized it. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And the father just totally disregards everything he says. He doesn't even get a chance to finish his speech. The father turns and says to his servants, the people that worked for him, he says, quick, bring the best robe. That would have been his robe. He says, put it on him. Put a ring on his finger. That's a sign that you belong to the family. And sandals on his feet. He says, bring the fattened calf. Back then, they didn't eat meat at every meal, and the fattened calf was like the prized possession of the family. You save that for the big, like crazy, life-changing event. He says, bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He's back. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting? The son, he had a plan. His plan was to say, look, I know I've failed you, but I will get back to work. Let me be your servant. Let me rebuild my resume. And the father says, no, I don't want what you can do for me. I want you. I want you. He's thrilled with the fact that his son is back home. Somewhere along the way, the son's picture of his father it lost its sense of accuracy. He believes that his relationship to the father is based on what he can do and what he can't do. And that's why his plan coming back is to get to work. And the father is saying, look, not only am I not concerned about the lack of work in the past, the lack of ways you've gotten it right in the past, what your past resume says, but I don't want you to come to me like looking to build another resume and getting back to work. This is about you being my son. He's not looking for a servant. He just wants a son. It's not a responsibility. It's a relationship. And I know like some of you, especially been in the church for a long time, you're probably thinking like, well, okay, hold on a second. Aren't we supposed to live a certain way? The idea is that everything we do is just a response to that love. It's not the requirement for it. We love because he first loved us. That's the idea, and that's where life change comes from. I've spoken to some of you, and maybe you're not like living a crazy rebellious lifestyle, right? But maybe there's this sense like there's something more. Like maybe the Father, maybe God is better than you thought he was, and I've heard it. Like I've heard almost like the pre-recorded speeches. Like, well, okay, well, what do I have to do? Like, what am I signing up for? Do I have to go through some program, or am I gonna have to give this? Am I gonna have to do that? And it's like, where's the catch? And there is no catch. God is not concerned about what you can do. He wants you. He wants your heart. He wants a relationship. It's a beautiful picture, amazing picture. So he tells him to ditch his resume. But the story doesn't end there. Remember, there are two kids. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. And when he came near the house, he heard the music and dancing. And he called to one of his servants and asked him what was going on. He hears like the beat. He hears the bass. Like, what's going on back at home? It sounds like there's a block party. He says, your brother has come. he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry, and he refused to go in. He's now separated himself. So the father went out and pleaded with him. Here's where we learn what's going on inside the son. It says, "But he answered his father, 'Look,'" huge sign of disrespect, "all these years I've been slaving for you, and I never disobeyed your orders. Look at how I've worked for you. Look at my resume. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. Yet when this son of yours, not my brother, but this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, come home, you kill the fattened calf for him." The older son has more in common with the younger son than we realize. Both of them are just in this for what they want. The younger son goes after it by running from his father. The older son goes after it by working for his father. One thinks he'll find it apart from his father. The other one thinks he'll get it from his father. He's in it for what he wants. He's not in it for his father. This is not about a relationship. He's comparing the resumes. He's saying, "Look what I've done. I've slaved for you all my life, and I get nothing. And he has not slaved for you. His resume stinks, and he gets the fattened calf." Like, it does not make sense to him because he's looking at God on the basis of his resume, not a relationship. And this is the picture that Jesus is painting. Look, he has now separated himself from the Father. He is outside the party. He's left, almost like the younger son has. And it's because he's not getting what he wants. It's because he believes that the Father wants what he can do for him, not him. He's got it all wrong. You see, the foundational idea and what Jesus is getting at is that this idea of being lost is relating to God on the basis of your resume, on whether you've done enough or not done enough, not on the basis of a relationship where you're accepted regardless of how you have performed and how you will perform. There's kind of an unsettling warning here for those, especially those of us who have been in the church for a while, people who say that they follow Jesus. There's a lot that the two brothers have in common, but there's one thing that they don't. You see, the younger brother has become painfully aware that he's lost. The older brother is not. The younger brother has this beautiful reconciliation with the Father. The older brother does not. You see, when we relate to God on the basis of what we've done on a resume, like when you've blown it and your resume stinks, it is easy to accept the fact, to embrace the fact that God is not concerned about your resume, that you can ditch it. Right? Because it's like, well, it stinks anyway, so I'm glad that's not what our relationship is built on. But the older brother is proud of his resume. And so he doesn't want the Father to ditch it. He feels like he's worked for it. So the younger son feels like, I haven't performed well, so I don't deserve to be called your son. Whereas the older son is like, I have performed well, I do deserve to be called your son. The younger son is separated by rebellion. The older son is actually separated by his religion. The younger son is separated by what he's done wrong. The older son is separated by what he's done right, because he's relating to God on the basis of his resume. That's a warning to the religious people that Jesus is talking to in the crowd. And it's something, if you are a Christian, if you call yourself a Christian, it's something we cannot ignore. There's a reason Jesus ends the story there. He doesn't tell us if the older son goes in or not, because this is really a message to the religious people. How do you understand your relationship to God? Are you relating to him based on what you've done for him, or based on what he's done for you? The fact that all of this is a gift that you can do nothing to deserve. The older son says he's gotten nothing, but really he's gotten everything. In fact, the father responds to him. He says, you've always been with me. Everything I have is yours. I've given you, I've taken care of you my whole life. What are you not seeing? But he believes that he deserves things, and so he's not getting what he wants. It's a sense of entitlement. It's something we have to watch out for. What this ultimately comes down to is the way the two sons, understand God. I mentioned my daughter Mia earlier. We make them eat vegetables every night for dinner. And if my son Logan isn't eating his vegetables, Mia, she gets angry because she has to eat her vegetables. And right away, she'll point out, hey, he's not eating his vegetables. She'll get angry about it. She's totally unhappy. Why? Because she's doing what she's supposed to be doing, and he's not. And she doesn't like it. She has to suffer, and he should too. But there's this one day when I brought home a donut from work, or stopped home on the way from work, and I broke the donut. I gave part of it to Mia, and I gave part of it to my son Logan, and Mia ate it in like seconds. She was thrilled. But Logan wouldn't eat it because, I don't know, I guess he didn't think that it didn't have sprinkles or whatever, but he was like, no, I don't want it. He thought I was trying to get him something give him something that wasn't going to taste good, and he was refusing it. And it was amazing to see how Mia's response completely changed when she saw that he was eating something that he was going to like. Like, all of us in the kitchen were all like, no, eat it. Like, it was a totally different vibe. It wasn't like, you have to eat it. It was like, look what you're missing. Even Mia, like, with her mouth full of donut, was like, eat it. You're going to like it. It was a totally, totally different vibe. And if he doesn't eat it, the feeling is like, are you kidding me? You are missing out on something amazing. Not like anger, like, you should be eating that donut if I'm going to eat the donut. Why? Because of the difference between a donut and broccoli. One is a good thing we enjoy, the other one is a bad thing we endure, right? And that's how you can tell. If you're judgmental of people who are not doing what you do, maybe you're seeing God more like something you have to endure rather than someone you get to enjoy. So here's some signs, right? Some signs of an older brother mentality. One, is your faith, is it heavy? Does it feel like a responsibility? Does it feel like something you have to do? Or does it feel like something you get to do? Are you judgmental? Are you quick to point out when people aren't eating their broccoli? When they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing? Do you look down on people? Do you feel like because you do certain things or believe certain things or belong to a certain group, do you feel like that gives you the ability to point the finger, shake the finger, and look down at people who don't, who feel the other side or are part of a different party or part of a different group or believe different things? What this comes down to is, do you believe you've worked for what you have, or do you believe you've been given it? Is it something that's good? Is it a gift? Or is it a wage you deserve to be paid? And how do you respond? How do you respond when you see younger brothers coming home? Do you feel the same joy of the father? Like, this is the best thing that's happened. Someone else is getting to see how good the donut is. Or is it this feeling like, why is he getting what I've worked for? Or why am I not getting what I want? What's cool is that what we see at the end is a father who is undignified in his pursuit of people, and both of the brothers. This is where we'll end things. He runs out to the first son. He lifts up his robe, gives him a hug, a kiss, tells him, look, ditch the resume. You're my son. You don't have to work for me. And he welcomes him in like he never left. In fact, better than if he had never left. And then we see him go out to the older son who's throwing a hissy fit outside who's mad that there's a party going on and he doesn't get one, and the father leaves the party. That would be like a bride leaving her wedding. He's the host of the banquet. They've killed the fattened calf. It's a big deal. The host doesn't leave. And yet here he walks out, and it says he pleads with him. Like, what's the problem? And he's just sitting there pleading with him, like, come back. Come back in. We have a Father who is so good and who radically pursues people. People. And I don't know where you are today. Maybe you're far off. Maybe you're a rebel. Maybe you're not, but you're just not bought into it. Or maybe you've been doing it all right. Maybe you're an angry, judgmental Christian that has, says their prayers and reads the Bible and memorizes verses. But if we're honest, there is not that joy in your relationship with God because you're operating on the basis of your resume. And to you, the Father would say, ditch the resume. Yes, you've worked, but you've always been with me. So come back into the party. And for both of us, for all of us, no matter where you are, what I think you'll see is that he is way better than we ever thought he was.